unveiling the hidden horrors that lurked behind the shadows of history. It is an undeniable truth that slaves endured unimaginable atrocities. Yet, amidst the well-known narrative of their deplorable treatment as less than human, there exists untold and chilling revelations regarding the lives of black slaves. Brace yourself, for what lies ahead will unravel the disturbing depths of their existence, where the inhumanity and immorality seeped into even the most intimate realms. Beyond what society has come to accept, recently emerged records shed light on a haunting reality. Black slaves were bred, confined to farms reminiscent of animal breeding grounds. But that's merely the tip of the iceberg. There are still untold secrets veiled within the history of these breeding farms and the lives of those enslaved. In today's video, we'll talk about the horrific reality of slaves on breeding farms. Why were slave breeding farms necessary despite the availability of slaves in the market? The answer lies in the evolving dynamics of slavery during the 18th century. Slavery was legal in many parts of the world, allowing European and American traders to capture slaves in Africa and sell them in open markets. However, black slaves were not mere commodities. They endured grueling labor, harsh conditions, and the most difficult tasks. In the 19th century, the transatlantic slave trade was collapsing due to abolitionist movements. The British Parliament passed the Slavery Trade Act in 1807, intensifying the abolition movement in America. Meanwhile, slave labor's economic importance grew, especially in cultivating crops like sugarcane, cotton, and rice. This economic dominance led to conflicts between slave states in the South and abolitionist states in the North. Despite the profits, both Congress and President Thomas Jefferson supported the calls for abolition. In 1808, the official prohibition of slave importation into America was enacted. However, the invention of the cotton gin, a subsequent surge in cotton production and labor demand, only served to reinforce the economic indispensability of slave labor. It was during this time that the concept of black slave breeding farms emerged. In the past, masters had the ability to purchase slaves from the market legally due to the existence of the transatlantic slave trade. However, in 1808, a ban was implemented on importing slaves, which meant that masters could no longer acquire slaves to enhance their crop production. It is important to note that the 1809 Prohibition Act specifically prohibited the importation of slaves, but slavery within the country remained legal. This created a loophole that slave traders and masters could exploit by establishing slave farms, producing as many slaves as they desired. The introduction of the 1808 Prohibition Act served as a protective measure for the internal slave market, enabling slave owners to intensify their efforts. Disturbingly, slave owners referred to this practice as breeding, falsely disregarding the deliberate management and manipulation involved. The intricate system of priorities resulted in enslaved black women in America becoming a scarce commodity, receiving minimal or no health care at all. The book The American Slave Coast by Ned and Constance Sublette effectively portrays how the reproductive capacity of enslaved women became a commodified resource, with its protection becoming of utmost importance to those involved in the slave trade. It is noteworthy that home medical journals started circulating to provide assistance to enslaved women during challenging childbirths, a significant departure from the previous neglect they experienced. Black female slaves were compelled to bear 4 to 5 children, despite their high mortality rate, as their ability to reproduce was considered a crucial factor in their value as breeding stock. Consequently, these women were often advertised for sale, constantly subjected to trading and incentives by both slave owners and plantation owners. In this oppressive system, it was not uncommon for an enslaved woman to be promised freedom in exchange for bearing 15 children. The harsh reality was that girls as young as 12 or 13 could be forcibly impregnated and give birth, only to have their child forcibly separated from them, destined for a life of slavery. Under this dehumanizing system, people were reduced to mere products, stripped of their humanity at every turn. For enslaved women, the burden of childbearing often began as early as 13 years old. By the time they reached 20, they were likely expected to have endured 4 to 5 pregnancies. Enslaved women faced a multitude of vulnerabilities within the breeding system. In the 19th century American slave market, the sale of pregnant women was commonplace, demonstrating the disregard for their well-being. It is widely acknowledged that the lives of female slaves in America were filled with a distressing cycle of rape, pregnancy, and neglected postpartum recovery that lasted only a few weeks before being subjected to the expectation of pregnancy once again. Numerous accounts reveal that masters and slave owners themselves fathered children with their slaves, with no legal protections or recognition of the personhood of these women. The systematic extraction of children from enslaved women can only be described as a form of organized rape. And breeding farms epitomized the profound inequality present in society. White owners were shielded legally, while their black counterparts had no rights whatsoever. Sexual abuse within this context was overwhelmingly one-sided, with accounts from slaves documenting the intrusive control slave owners exerted over the intimate lives of their property. Within the twisted realm of slavery, arranged marriages and forced mating were deeply ingrained in a sinister breeding culture that stripped human beings of their dignity. The conditions under which they were bred mirrored the treatment of animals, exemplifying the depths of dehumanization. Testimonies from enslaved individuals shed light on the existence of stockmen, male slaves brought onto farms to impregnate female slaves owned by their masters. This disturbing practice of importing male slaves became a prevalent theme in the despicable breeding industry, as slave owners sought to maximize the production of slaves capable of enduring arduous physical labor in the fields. In 1880, economist Richard Stooch conducted a significant study on Virginia's farms, revealing a disturbing ratio of approximately 2 female slaves for every male slave. This imbalance strongly suggested that the breeding practices aimed to sustain the profitable domestic breeding industry during slavery. Slave owners justified their authority over enslaved individuals based on a deeply rooted racist ideology. The systematic rape on breeding farms was overlooked, with slave owners considering their control preferable to the autonomy of black slaves. House slaves faced the highest risk of sexual abuse from their masters. Enslaved women protected their children from their masters' wives to avoid revealing the father's identity. These despicable breeding practices aimed solely to enhance profits, reducing people to mere property. The industry generated enormous wealth, surpassing the value of gold, silver, currency, and even southern farmland. Slaveholders treated enslaved individuals as securities, using them as collateral to secure capital in state banks. Banks in influential southern states mortgaged slaves and bundled these mortgages into bonds that were sold globally, allowing individuals worldwide to profit from bonds backed by enslaved human beings. This ironic twist exposes the true nature of a supposedly enlightened world. It is crucial to acknowledge the moral decay of slave masters who normalized the breeding of slaves on farms and kept them in such degrading conditions. Understanding the history of how black slaves were treated in breeding farms and forced to breed should be a part of education, as it sheds light on the depths of human cruelty and serves as a reminder of the atrocities committed during the era of slavery.